welcome back to Colorado Politicking. I'm Pat Poblete, a legislative reporter with Colorado Politics, and we are really going to go around the horn with some of Colorado Politics' top reporters this week, starting with senior writer Joey Bunch. And Joey, you have been all over one of the biggest stories of this legislative session, transportation funding. You've been on it like white on rice. So let's kick it straight to you. What do we know? What's the latest on transportation funding?
Well, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting. It's a bill for the ages, and that's about how long we're going to be paying for this thing. Because Senate Bill 260, we're looking at $4 billion in fees and fares and taxes, and it all depends on how much you drive, how much you take Uber, how much you order Grubhub. I think it's all Latin for just how much can they get in your pocket. But, growth and the lack of attention to transportation is expensive too. We've got traffic jams on the interstate, which, suck up all our time, but it also sucks the life out of our economic development as well. We've got rural roads that haven't seen asphalt in decades, and Front Range Rail, that's expensive and it's decades away. So, we're kind of in a pay me now or pay me later situation. The problem is what the future holds. There's a big push to get cars off the roads and into mass transit. We've got we don't know yet how much the federal stimulus is going to be, and we don't know what the political fallout of Democrats asking for this much of a fee and fare hike a year before an election. That's always got an unsavory taste to it at the ballot box. We've got a long way to go on this thing, but only 3 weeks left in the session. Senate Bill 260 will be in Senate Finance Monday afternoon at 1:30 in the old Supreme Court chambers, or you can watch it online.
Now, that's one of the big issues of this session. Another big issue has been gun control legislation, particularly within these last couple months. And so let's take it now to Colorado Politics chief legislative reporter, Marianne Goodland. Marianne, we're starting to see the first kind of bits of gun control legislation in the aftermath of the mass shooting in Boulder work its way through the system. Where are we at with that?
We have three bills that are tied to the shooting in Boulder, some less than others. The first one that went through committee on Wednesday night was House Bill 1298, and this is an omnibus bill on background checks. It does a couple of different things. It bars people who have been convicted of violent misdemeanors from purchasing a gun for 5 years after that conviction. And this directly applies to the alleged shooter in the Boulder incident who was convicted of third-degree assault, which is a misdemeanor, about 3 years ago. The second thing that this thing does is it closes what's known as the Charleston loophole, which is a reference to a 2015 shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where the young man who committed those murders, he murdered 9 people at an African-American church, was able to obtain a gun, and his background check didn't come through in the 3 days allotted under South Carolina law. And Colorado has that same law. So under House Bill 1298, that if the background check doesn't come back in 3 days, you're going to wait longer to get a background check to get your gun. The two other bills that are still waiting action, one is a bill that sets up an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. This bill is sponsored by Representative Tom Sullivan, who has been a leading advocate for gun control laws here in the Capitol. It sets up this office within the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and it will do a couple of different things, including research and education on gun violence. The third bill, which is not yet scheduled for its first hearing, is a bill that would allow local governments to impose stricter gun laws than what's already in state law. This is known as preemption, and that bill is in the Senate, and we're waiting on that first hearing on that one. I do expect all three of these bills to pass.
Now, those are certainly two big pieces of policy, but it's almost impossible to talk about politics in the state of Colorado without talking about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And on that, we actually do have a little bit of news about Tabor. So let's bring in now Colorado Politics judicial reporter Michael Karlik. Michael, what are we hearing about Tabor?
Well, Pat, on Monday, the 10th Circuit, which is the federal appeals court based in Denver, is going to decide on a lawsuit that's a decade in the making about whether to overturn the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. You see, 10 years ago, state lawmakers and other elected officials filed suit to overturn the 1992 constitutional amendment. Now, as you're aware, conservatives tend to like TABOR because it keeps taxes low and spending also low, but Democrats dislike the provision because it tends to starve the government of funding for crucial services. But that's not exactly the argument that the plaintiffs are making. They point to the 1875 legislation that admitted Colorado as a state, which guarantees us a, quote, Republican form of government. Now, the plaintiffs interpret Republican to mean that where we elect our leaders and they make decisions on taxes and spending. Now, this lawsuit has been up and down the federal courts, with judges ruling that the individual legislators don't have standing, and also that local governments don't have standing. In 2019, a panel of the 10th Circuit reversed that decision and found that you can't determine whether local governments have standing to sue without also determining what a Republican form of government is. And so that is where we are on Monday, where in a rare hearing featuring all of the judges on the 9th Circuit, 5 who are nominees of Democratic presidents and 4 who are nominees of Republican presidents, they will consider that decision. Now, Pat, partisanship is not essential here because, as you will recall, a Democratic governor and a Democratic attorney general are defending TABOR in this case. But depending on how the 10th Circuit rules on Monday, we could either see this lawsuit come to a swift close or hopefully move for a couple more years, but hopefully not a decade.
Well, it certainly has been a big week in Colorado politics. So big thanks to Marianne, to Joey, and to Michael making his debut on here for recapping all of that. Until next week, I'm Pat Poblete. We'll be back soon to bring you more news, but hope you enjoyed tuning in. Hope you enjoyed what you heard, and we will see you next week.